Rome did not come into being in a day. In centuries with the hundreds of skilled men and other people, and the lack of the workers gave their blood for it. It was a time when every fifth man on the earth was a Roman. It goes that Rome was not defeated from outside, but inside. Had America also committed the mistake, which the Roman Empire did, in its highly powerful war power. Brutal competition is the major difference between the East and West. The king continued to make efforts to get the city open, but how are you, friend? I, Faisal. How strange it is that an empire, despite having expired centuries ago, still has its systems operational. Its culture, words, proverbs, and its architecture are still exemplary in the world today. It was an empire which pioneered the modern standing army, which gave for the first time the institution of the Senate to run the state affairs, which gave a reasonable form of democracy as a successful republic during the 5 centuries of its era. Many political terms, such as republic, Senate veto, and dictatorship, have been derived from Roman politics. At the peak of the Roman Empire, every fifth individual on the globe was a Roman. This kingdom, Grand Empire, and Republican existed for a total of 2,200 years. How this empire became so great, and how it declined and why, it is one of the best stories in the history of the world. Roman historian Titus Livius said a legend about the origin of Rome based on grapevines 500 years after its existence. The legend says a temple existed near the present-day city of Rome. This was the temple of the virgin goddess Vesta, and was specific for the worship of the virgins. The women priests of the temple did not marry, as their lives were dedicated to the Vesta goddess. A virgin princess, Rhea Silvia, was also present as a priest in this temple. The princess was forced by the palatial intrigues to live in this temple as a priest. However, contrary to the conventions and customs, the Mars god fell in love with her. Both would meet secretly, which resulted in the birth of a twin baby boy. The babies were named Romulus and Remus. The birth of 2 by a virgin princess was a big shock to the temple and the royal court. The king was scared, and the prestige of the temple was also defiled. The royal court decreed to dispose of the babies to the river, so they were put in a basket and consigned to the river water. The river, however, did not sink the basket, and at a distance, it got stuck to the bank bushes and stopped. When a she-wolf, Rupa, came to drink in the river, she saw the babies in a basket and saved them by taking them away. The she-wolf fed the babies on her milk and raised them to youth. The brothers, who were fed on the milk of a she-wolf, leading a very active life, once happened to reach the east of the river Tiber. Then this area was not widely inhabited and had just had a few mountains with some settlements. Both brothers decided to establish a small town on any of the hills. However, both fell out on the question of picking up the mountain for settling a town. The fight was prolonged to the extent of killing of Remus by his brother Romulus. Then he picked up a mountain of his choice and settled a town on it named Rome after his own name. It goes that Rome was founded on April 21st, 753 BCE. Although it is a legend, yet for the purpose of sorting out the problems, the element of violence is such a character that the Romans kept up till last. Violence for purpose was cherished by the Roman kingdom, empire, and republican in all 3 tiers. This characteristic gave them rise and also brought their downfall in the long run. Stay with us to know what is the extreme of power and how it erodes from the inside when it reaches the climax. Romulus wanted to expand the town, but he did have the people for this purpose. A huge population was needed to beautify and develop the town. This is the point from where another important feature of Rome surfaced: immigration. To make Rome a strong town, Romulus bought the people from other parts. He even opened the door of Rome to the criminals and deserted soldiers. People were pouring into this town slowly, and it was to take generations to make it a strong city. In the scheme of immigration, majority was of the male settlers. Women did not come there at all. Particularly the young women were not ready to come there in any way. Therefore, the population had a severe imbalance. At this point, Romulus played a trick. He implemented his basic strategy, which was the use of violence for a purpose. He invited the male members of the Sabine and the Latine tribes of the nearby area to a fun party. These people came to the party for merrymaking, leaving the women at home. The lively party continued throughout the day. In this intoxicating atmosphere, the tribesmen did not know what game had been played on them. When they were dancing and singing with the Roman fighters in the dark of night took away their women. No one could defend that village, as all male members were enjoying the party. Romulus' strategy was to forcibly bring the young and healthy women and marry them by force to the Roman males. It was to get more and more pretty and healthy children. When the tribesmen came back to their homes, it was all mourning. Their women had been picked up. The males came to Rome and lamented over the loss of their women, but to no avail. The villagers hit upon a plan to avenge. They had taken a long time to prepare, and by the time they reached Rome's door, 9 to 10 months had passed. It meant it was now too late. Many of the kidnapped women had become mothers, and others were pregnant. Both the forces came face to fight, and the Romans presented the tribesmen women with babies, or in pregnancy before them. These women, out of fear or for the sake of their kids, solicited the males not to fight or their children would be killed. Rather, they offered them to get settled in Rome instead of fighting for Rome. By that means, they would also gain power, and their women would also not be away from them. This offer created rifts among the tribesmen. Some stood for a fight, and others wanted to patch up. Probably they were the persons who did not have their women abducted. This was not a bad offer, as Rome was a relatively better and organized city. So, an agreement was reached on this point, and they also got settled in Rome. The population of Rome rose, and a new culture from a blend of others emerged. People became tolerant of the cultures of others for their own benefit. Rome continued to attack and annex different areas and increase its population. As the Roman population rose to 4,000 or 5,000, Romulus declared chieftains of different tribes and areas. The chieftain was called pater, which linguistically meant father. Romulus got all paters into an institution called a senate. These chieftains of the tribes also began to be called senators representing their tribal community. Sometime later, voting was started to elect the senators at the tribal level. This laid the foundation for a primary form of democracy in Rome, as counting was carried out during the election. So the Romans in the first instance counted the tribes and the people therein. Then the religions, gods and goddesses, were counted in the second step. With the passage of time, these religions, faiths, and creeds were dubbed into the Roman gods. Initially, the different tribes had their own gods and goddesses. Now a successful blending of different cultures had begun in Rome. The blending was cemented when the 12 months of a year were laid out, and every month was named after gods or goddesses, festivals, or the digits. They first worked out a 10-month calendar wherein Martius was named after a god. This month was later changed to pronounce March. October was the 8th month of the year. January and February were later added to the calendar, and October fell at 10 in the 12th month of the year. January was named after the god Janus, and February after the festival, Februa. This all was done within a century of the Roman city, that is, by the 4th century BC. Then the Roman population reached 4,000 to 5,000, which then was quite a reasonable number. Over time, changes were effected in the 12 months of the calendar, but the basic feature remained unchanged. Cultures were getting mixed up in Rome, and they were uniting and becoming more organized than others around. Legend goes that including Romulus, 7 kings ruled Rome from time to time. During the era of everyone, things were bought or secured, and if not possible, they were taken by force. Violence for purpose continues to run in the veins of the Romans like blood. Rome was transformed from a village into a town, then a city, a rich city, and finally a powerful kingdom. It was ruled by a king. However, it was not possible. Violence gets into the instinct of a group, and their own people are spared. After all, Romulus had also murdered his brother to lay the foundation of this city. That was, relations were killed from the start. Therefore, one after the other, the kings used brutal violence to reach the rule. These kings would also exercise violence against their own people to impose their will on them. The 6th king Servius faced a conspiracy of his ambitious daughter and her husband Tarquinius. Both pushed the Senate to overthrow their father and get to the rule. Soon violence was used in this tug of war. Senate was debating an issue when Tarquinius pushed his father-in-law down the stairs. The king rolled down to the street on the ground. Here Tarquinius and the loyalists of his daughters were present, and they thrashed the king badly. The old was king lying on the road. Historian Livy says the daughter of the king came galloping a coach and trampled the king under the horse's feet. The king was left on the road to die. The sloppy road on the screen is believed to be where King Servius was heated and left to die. Ahead is the street where he was run over. The Romans believed the street to be ominous and named it Viaicus Sediartis, the evil road. So Tarquinius by force made the majority members of the Senate accept him as king and put a stamp on it. The Senate was scared of his violent companions, so they approved the forced king. In the fight of violence, Tarquinius had won, so he deserved to be the natural king of Rome. The seventh king Tarquinius was also a competent engineer. To distinguish Rome from other cities, Tarquinius initiated a number of construction and development projects. It was also because Rome had evolved politically and socially, yet a large part of it was presented the look of a deserted area. The city streets would remain marshy for most of the year. So King Tarquinius made a grand design for civic development. The Temple of Jupiter was a gem in the development scheme. It was the largest temple presented nowhere in the other part of the world. Tarquinius wanted to impress upon his people that he was a representative and chosen man of Jupiter. So he set on the construction of the grand Jupiter temple. The job needed a huge amount of money and thousands of workers, so heavy taxes were imposed on the people. The people were also forced to labor to cut and bring price stones from a long distance. Tarquinius also constructed the underground sewerage system, the Cloaca Maxima, for Rome spread over 7 hills and slopes. It was a vast project, and some of its parts are still for the open tourist view and available in the old map of the city. This is the same 2,500-year-old sewerage system of Tarquinius. A part of it is still functional for the city of Rome. Tarquinius also set up a forum to make Rome a business and cultural center. He made a structure where shops for business could be set up and people could get together in the evening. These projects were the pride of the Romans, and Tarquinius did not care for the lives of thousands to complete them. There were no safety measures to complete such a major project at that time. The ordinary Romans were involved in doing such jobs which were sure to take human lives. For example, digging underground tunnels was as good as inviting death. The poor prisoners and slaves were given these jobs, and most would prefer to commit suicide instead. They would not enter the tunnel. Tarquinius, or any king at that time, did not shell their projects because of people. Their ambition and arrogance showed as if nothing has happened. Tarquinius is especially remembered in history as Tarquinius the Arrogant for this mindset. Today, the monuments of the Tarquinius era, the Roman Forum, and Cloaca Maxima boast the Roman glory. However, it must never be ignored what cost was paid for it. Sire Ludiambi saw the white marbled Taj Mahal on the bank of the Yamuna River stands fit for other historical monuments. These buildings and tombs, these walls and boundaries, the pillars showing glory of the absolute rulers. They are the wounds on the earth, the wounds of labor soaked in the blood of mine and your ancestors. During the 25 years of rule of King Tarquinius, the Romans got hard-pressed under heavy taxes and oppression. The Romans were opposed to monarchy, let alone despising King Tarquinius. For them, the word king became hateable. The Romans used rex for a king, but they began to use this word to express hatred for their opponents. The Romans wanted to get rid of King Tarquinius, but they were afraid of his supporters, since the supporters were violent. In reality, when the outer force fails to break one, the inner force serves a purpose. The same happened with Tarquinius. An offense by his son sank him in his system. King Tarquinius Superbus's son Sextus sexually assaulted religious noblewoman Lucretia. Lucretia put up resistance, but Sextus threatened her that, if you did not yield to my demand, I will kill you and your black slave, and blamed you both for illicit relations and caught red-handed. Scared Lucretia surrendered, and after Sextus left, she told her painful story to 3 persons. The 3 persons included her husband, father, and Brutus. Brutus was the main character among them. Brutus was the nephew of King Tarquinius. From the same dynasty, the brother of Brutus was killed by King Tarquinius in the power game. After that, Brutus lived profiled despite being a member of the same family. Rather, he would pose himself as insane and foolish, lest he would also lose his life for having ambition of power. He was named Brutus because, in Old Latin, it stands for a lethargic and foolish person. Brutus held the family of Lucretia in high esteem religiously, and also had high regard for Lucretia. Brutus boiled in rage when Lucretia told him what treatment the king's son gave her. The helpless Lucretia ended her story and took out a dagger from under her sheet, put on her heart, and pressed it fully. Brush quickly leaned to pull out the dagger, but by that time, the damage had been done. Moved by the situation, Brutus swore to take revenge for the death of Lucretia and his brother in a way that neither Tarquinius will live nor any further king in Rome. Lucretia died and Brutus led the rebellion in Rome. It was 509 BCE, and from this point, the end of the Roman Empire began, the beginning of the end. It was a time when the population of Rome was 20,000 to 30,000. It had become a reasonably good city, and a considerable number of people would also support Brutus. The word rex used for the king was now used by the Romans to disgrace their rivals. So this was a situation in which Brutus raised a standard of revolt against the king. He also got the support of the powerful elite of the senators. Tarquinius then was outside the city on a military campaign. With the help of his allies, Brutus took control of the city gates. When King Tarquinius returned, he was not allowed to enter the city, and the gates were closed to him. With the support of the neighboring states, Tarquinius repeatedly strove to enter the city and conquer it, but failed. Brutus, who was left, survived after killing his brother and had posed as insane and foolish, very delicately put Tarquinius out of the entire game without committing murder. After prolonged defeats, Rex Tarquinius, the arrogance, proceeded to Greece and died anonymously as an old man in any city. Neither the grave of Alexander nor the grave of Darius, how the names of the renowned were erased, the defeat of Tarquinius changed Rome. Under the leadership of Brutus, was switched from the kingdom to republic in 509 BCE. The kingdom in Rome came to an end after sustaining for 244 years. By that time, the Romans had become temperamentally very staunch in two things. One was their independence as a citizen, and the second was their hatred for one-man rule, autocracy. They had developed a deep hatred even for the word king. The revolution had this very objective. In the system, the males would elect the senators who, in turn, would choose from among them. These two senators would serve as rulers of Rome for 1 year. The institution of these two persons was called a consul. It meant one state and two rulers. The two rulers would decide every matter in consultation, taking the Senate on board. Now, the Romans did not like to see an autocrat ruling them for years. Would you like to know the first two members of the consul elected by the Romans? One was the same goof Brutus, and the other was Lucius Collatinus. Lucius, whose wife Lucretia had become the victim of the lust of sexes. However, this change brought about an elementary form of democracy. Remember, the system did not provide for the women and slaves to vote. Moreover, a test to judge the wisdom in economic affairs was set for a political position. This test could be qualified by only those who were rich and experienced in running a big business. Consequently, despite this nascent democracy, the patriarchs or the rich class and plebeians, the poor remained in different classes in the new Rome as this difference stayed intact. The Roman society continued to be divided into two classes. The poor plebeians would live miserably with 6 members in a single room, side by side with the patricians living in big mansions enjoying every luxury. In these big mansions, 6 or 7 patricians had hundreds of servants at their disposal. This difference was impossible to eliminate for various reasons. No plebeian could marry a patrician, nor he could do business with them. Plebeians could not become senators, judges, generals, or magistrates. However, they had the only right to elect a patrician to the Senate within their local community, like we do by electing a member of the elite in the intra-fighting of the elitists believing he would fight for our rights, when factually it is the internecine political tug-of-war of the patricians. In the Roman system, the plebeians were entitled to elect the patricians, but they did not have any say in politics, even no involvement in the consultation process. This all was done by the patricians or the elitists. Later, a tribune was picked up from among the plebeians, But he, too, was not practically involved in the system. You saw in this video how Rome emerged as a kingdom from a small village of no importance, and then the kingdom turned into a republic. In the next video, you will know how was their Republican era, what it gave the world, and then why the Republican turned into imperialism. Why did the abominable idea of Rex come back, and what was the reason for the decline of the Roman Empire? Have America and other world powers passed through the same phase, or are they passing? You must watch. An old, injured, and weak man in tattered clothes was standing outside in a public place. This old man alone bowed down the whole Senate. On the flag, every building and wall has 4 letters inscribed. The Romans had an obsession with the 4 letters. The Romans would fight with short, double-edged sword clivus and pylon lengths for a reason. It was a strange and unique country simultaneously ruled by 2 and for centuries. Rome did not come into being in a day, but the blood of millions of workers and laymen was used to build it. It was a time when every fifth in the world was a Roman. How Rome got glory and why it ended. Is America also pursuing the same path? How are you guys? I, Zod obeyed. After Rome transformed from a kingdom to a republic, 4 letters were inscribed on every wall and building. SPQR. These 4 letters were the brief of the phrase Senatus Populusque Romanus. It is generally interpreted as the re-people of the Senate or Roma. The Romans under the Republic would take pride in being free, which meant that no absolute ruler was installed on them. That was, they elect the senators exercising their free will and their choice forms of government. The rulers at the time were not able to recruit the citizens into the army by force during the war. It was the choice of the Romans to serve the army for bravery and love for the country, so it was his choice. Moreover, the Romans were free to criticize their rulers, expressing their feelings by wall chalking. Roman elite would get slaves from outside, and no Roman could be held slaves by them. So on all these counts, the Romans were free, as such they had a reason to feel proud. However, it was also a fact that 90% poor were plebeians who were also working class. Their cases were decided by the patricians who formed 10% of the population. There was no written law, so the patrician judges were free to follow convention and interpret it as they chose. Often the decisions would create very difficult situations for plebeians, particularly when the opposite party was a patrician. It was highly painful and troublesome for the plebeians. However, this practice did not last long. It happened one day that a weak, injured old man in tatters was standing in a Roman market. His condition was very precarious, and people tried to recognize him. Oh! He was a soldier of the Roman army whose tale of bravery was sung everywhere. People recognized him and gathered around him. People asked what happened to him and why. He told the people how he went to fight outside the country, leaving his house, family, and farms behind. When he came back, his farms were taken away by the rich landlord and his family was left in a lurch. The soldier did not receive his farms back and was obliged to borrow money, which he failed to repay, and the landlord made him a prisoner. The landlord could not make him a slave, so he put him in a private jail and tortured to force him to arrange the money. The old man managed to escape from prison and reached this bazaar. He showed people the deep wounds of lashes on his back and clothes spotted with the blood. The Romans got highly infuriated when they saw their brave soldier in that state. In the background were also the complaints of other plebeians whose farms were taken away by the rich landlords. So the Romans held strikes all over Rome. Plebeians demanded the elitists to mend their way, or they would not open their shops, serve the army, or work in the city projects. Plebeians locked their shops and left the city for outside. They also threatened to establish their own city along the river Tiber. Months passed in this dispute. The ruling elitists, the patricians, had all their projects halted. The pomp and show of their life depended on the continuous labor of the plebeians for them. So when their own luxuries and glitter of life were at stake, the elitists decided to accept the demand of the plebeians. Senior senators around 450 BC framed a code of ethics for the Romans. The code spelled out rules for every class of society and determined their positions. The plebeians were also consulted on them. Both sides agreed to a draft, which was written on 12 bronze plates, which were hung at different places in the city. This agreement between the haves and the have-nots is remembered as the 12 Tables. It is also called the first coded law based on which law was developed in Rome for the next many centuries. The code explained the court procedure, appointment of the judges, and conduct of the trials. What would be the rights of families, guardianship, and the rules for the transfer of the land? What are the major crimes, and what punishments are for them? What is sacred and unsacred? All was written therein. The laws written on the 12 plates were also carved on the Roman walls. Even today, there are stone walls in Rome which show parts of these laws written on them. The Romans, in fact, made a problem clear for them in these 12 tables. That was, what would be the rights of a class and its duties. It must be borne in mind that these freedoms were for the Romans and predominantly for the males. It had a little part for the women, but nothing for the slaves and the aliens who were not yet given Roman citizenship. There were many areas which the Romans had conquered, but their people were not given the citizenship of Rome. Under the Republic, the Senate would elect a consul of 2 members who make decisions with consultation. You know these members were elected for a year. Plebeians also got a little share in the representation of the Senate when they got their rights accepted. The consul members in the Senate were now also bound to consult the plebeian representative, tribune. So the induction of the plebeians in the government and army strengthened and improved the Republican. They established standards for the first time which existed nowhere in the areas around. For example, they set a standard for the quality of the roads. For the first time in the Republic, a standard was set for coinage. The other currencies and coins after that were dispensed with. This, and like many other projects, strengthened Rome from the inside. After that, Rome embarked on mega projects for expansion. Rome needed that expansion to meet the expenses of its growing population and the development schemes. For resources, new and rich lands were required. Romans and their predecessor kingdoms would generate revenues by looting the conquered rich lands. To lead the first expedition for expansion, the Romans temporarily appointed a patrician Camillus as a dictator in 396 BCE, a ruler who would wield the king's powers but not called the king. Although the Romans disliked monarchy from the bottom of their heart, yet they kept little room for it to meet emergency situations. They would elect a competent person as dictator for a short time and entrust all powers to him. The appointment of Camillus as dictator aimed at expansion, which in the first step had targeted the neighboring Etruscan for conquest, as opposed a major challenge to the Romans. Etruscan was an older and more developed civilization than the Romans. The Etruscans were rich and also had influence on the kings. The last Roman king, Trancunius, had also attempted to recoup his kingdom with the help of Etruscan. He failed to achieve the purpose due to the half-heartedness of the Etruscans. Anyway, the Romans feared being succumbed to rich, developed, and civilized Etruscans at any time. River Tiber demarcated both states. The Romans were on the eastern side of the river, and the Etruscans on the western. The VI for the Etruscans was the nearest and the most powerful of the Romans. Dictator Camillus surrounded the VI fort and made a successful attack on it. He killed the whole population of the VI city. Then he advanced and burned all symbols of the Etruscan civilization and the monuments to the minutest. So much so that today no trace of their history or script is available. After freedom and bravery, this heinous conduct was the nature of the Romans. They did not need any pretext for, and would act brutality in the name of self-defense. However, they soon would deal with the enemy more fearless than the Etruscans. The enemy not only inflicted deep wounds on them, but the lesson they taught worked for the Romans for the next 1,000 years. The Gaul tribes in North Italy, where France is located today, attacked Rome in 390 BCE. Previously, these tribes were defeated against Rome in low-level battles, but not they attacked jointly under the command of their chief Rhymes. They suddenly took over the Roman army in the north of Rome on the river Allia. The Roman forces failed to understand surprise attack. The soldiers of the powerful Roman army were cut down like anything, and the rest fled to their lives. The survivors ran to the city and shouted, "Gauls are here! Gauls are here! Barbars have come! Run away!" In a discreet move, the Romans evacuated the city and took refuge at a nearby hill Capitoline. There was a strong fort capable of facing the months-long siege. The Gauls surrounded the Capitoline hill and settled down there. Realizing that the Gauls would not leave, the Romans took to talk with them. The Gauls demanded the Romans to give the gold equal to the weight of 1,000 pounds. The Romans took months in talks with the Gauls to know about the standard weight of the pound to buy time. They wanted an outside force to attack the Gauls from behind, for which they had also sent a team. However, when they lost hope of outside help, they gave up the discussion on the standard weight. The Gauls overweight the scale when the Romans were giving them gold. The Gauls exceeded the weight of the standard of 1 pound at that time. The Gauls' chief rhymes uttered the historic words when the Romans objected to the increased weight of the standard scale. He said, "Be quiet, losers cannot be choosers." The defeat taught the Romans much. They held long debates on their defeat and meticulously reviewed every point of defeat. They reached the conclusion to upgrade their military. The defeat at the hands of the Gauls had actually helped the Romans to streamline. The Romans were singular for learning from their mistakes, sorting them out, and then acting upon them. This defeat also taught them the lesson to upgrade their defense and military. They first decided to build a strong wall around Rome to check the way of invaders. So a wall 11 kilometers long and 33 high was erected. The wall was fortified by the volcanic rocks. The wall encircled all the 7 hills of the city. It had 16 gates, which made entry of the enemy inside the city impossible when closed. The wall, called the Servian Wall, still partially remains with gates in Rome. It was a lesson the Romans implemented. Secondly, they also modified the army to make it the strongest of that time. They founded a new standing army. The kind of army you must have seen the action movies today. This army was established at that time. Earlier, the army of the citizens would fight and then return to their homes after the war ended. High standards were laid for recruitment and training of the new army. Only young age and physically fit persons were recruited in the army. The Roman army was trooped in 6,000 soldiers, and every troop was called legion. Legions also had a few hundred soldiers from other nations. They were taken from the allied nations or the conquered lands. The Roman soldiers were prohibited from marrying or getting private property while serving. It purported to make the Roman soldiers focus on fighting instead of attending to their farms and families. The unit of every soldier was in fact his family. That was why the soldiers were friendly to each other like in a family and would fight shoulder to shoulder on the battlefield. It was the first army in history which was raised like a cult, that the soldiers were thick to each other like one thing. Under any circumstances, the brother soldiers would stand shoulder to shoulder. To raise and train an army like a cult is the principle to be followed even by the armies of the modern days. The new Roman army was given rich training. Every Roman soldier would carry a weight of 25 kilograms to march for 36 within 5 hours daily as training. Each soldier had a special helmet with his name, social status, and the weight of the helmet inscribed. Every soldier was to protect his weapon like his life. Along with this hard training, the soldiers were also punished hard for other mistakes. Sometimes the whole unit was punished harshly if it committed a major mistake, or any of its soldiers would desert. As punishment, the units were lined up in tens. Then the 10th soldier was beaten with a club to death. The Romans would call it decimation, meaning the elimination of the 10th soldier. The English language derived this word from the Roman language, which means destruction, massacre, and annihilation. A soldier was stoned to death if found asleep during the duty time. Another quality was cultivated in the Roman army besides harsh training and punishments. It was the capability of engineering. The Roman army would construct garrisons, bridges, and roads in whichever areas it went. This trait is also developed in the modern army today to enable it to create a favorable environment. The Roman army was the first in history to be professional and salaried. The Romans were the first to make ranks in the army, which motivated the soldiers to work hard for promotion and show discipline. The Roman elite would work very hard on the discipline and the weaponry for the soldiers. The Roman soldiers would use a pylon as a lance and a double-edged sword called a gladius. The Roman soldiers would use long pylon lance to attack from behind the shield cover during the battle. These lances were made of heavy metals that would pierce through the enemy's shields and get crooked. The Roman soldiers had the leverage of these crooked lances that the enemy was not able to pull them out from the shield at once. So the enemy's soldiers were to fight the Roman soldiers with shields after the pylons were pierced in. This would weaken the enemy and strengthen the Roman soldiers. This great technique, certainly provided them with an edge over the enemy. This tiny gladius sword with it was important to make a sharp attack on the enemy. And secondly, they did not hit each other when the Romans would line up in formation, just the soldiers holding long swords and standing in formation with their swords spilling out to hit each other. The swords were in short size to keep the soldiers standing like an iron wall and filling the gaps. This gives an idea of how much the Romans were meticulous about the discipline and arms of their soldiers. The Romans had learned these techniques and niceties after mistakes and lessons of centuries. These genius tactics rendered the Romans a formidable war machinery. Now, the Gauls could not even think of attacking them. However, the problem was that Roman progress and prosperity were dependent on these conquests. However, for any state, a continuous was war unaffordable. But the Romans needed to do all that for their survival. After the Romans had become a super military power, the states around proved a wall of sand before them. The small states and cities in mainland Italy were captured by Rome. The Roman army conquering this region reached up to the southern bank of mainland Italy. It had the Mediterranean Sea ahead, and the Sicily island just 1.5 kilometers from the Italian coast. The holder of the most powerful navy, the Carthaginian Empire, ruled the island of Sicily and the Mediterranean Sea at that time. Now, two powerful empires of the time were face to face. Now, only one had to survive from the account of that time. You must have heard about and watched the movies of Hannibal, who was a commander of the Carthaginian Empire. In the next video, we will discuss the clash between the Roman Republic and the Carthaginian Empire and the Romans' downfall. It is a must-watch. The Carthaginian general Hannibal attacked Rome. Leading an army of elephants and passing through the snowy tracks, he conquered the whole of Rome, but failed to make a hole in the wall. The 95% of plebeians lived in single rooms no better than that pigeonholes. The tribal chief agreed to give the space equal to only the hide of an ox. The queen cut the hide into the width of a valley. Hannibal was a nightmare for the Romans, but their gift cost them heavily. Rome did not come into being in a day. Building it took centuries of the blood of hundreds of experts and millions of workers without reward. There was a time when every fifth citizen in the world was a Roman. How did Rome become great, and why it declined? Is America also treading the same path today? How are you, Guy? I am Faisal Warage from the land where Lebanon and Palestine are. The Phoenician Queen Dido escaped for her life in the 8th century BCE through the sea route. She landed in North Africa, where Tunisia is located today. Here the locals surrounded her and took her to their chieftain. The queen told her painful story to the chieftain and asked for land so that she and her companions could live peacefully. The chieftain of the African tribe taunted, "Well, you want my land. I cannot give you the land more than the space of the skin of an ox. Will it be sufficient?" The queen consented to it and got an ox slaughtered. She peeled off its skin and cut it into thin strips. The total length of these strips was enough to encircle a hill on the coast. The chieftain was highly impressed with the intelligence of the queen and gave her and her companions this land. Here the queen laid the foundation of the Carthage city, which later became a great naval and trade power of the ancient world. They were much more civilized than the Roman Republic and had a better system than the Romans. In the north of Tunisia near Kairouan, the remains of the city still tell its grandeur. The Carthaginian Empire had become a super naval in the 5th century BCE when Rome had yet to stand on its feet. The empire in its prime spanned North Africa to South Europe up to Spain of today. This empire also ruled innumerable islands in the Mediterranean Sea. Among these islands also included the important island of Sicily right in front of the Roman Empire in the south. So it became imperative for the Romans to deal with the Carthaginians if they were to become naval and trade power in the region. Therefore, they did the same. The Romans called the Carthaginians Penis in their language, as they were Phoenician origin in Lebanese and Palestinian lands. They used the word pony for more than one Carthaginian. That is why historians have named the Romans' battles with the Carthaginians as Punic Wars. These wars continue for 118 years. The Romans had a dire need for a strong naval fleet to fight the Carthaginians. However, when these battles were initiated around 260 BCE, the Romans did not have any naval ships. The Romans had great expertise in the ground battle, so they devised a technique to fight the Carthaginians in the sea. They stole some ships of the Carthaginians, which contained material to build the ships and the skill men. These wooden panels were also marked to join the parts. With the labor for months and engineering skills, the Romans prepared many naval ships and fleets. The ships were constructed to enable the Romans to use their ground expertise in the sea as well. For that, they invented a new war tool. This tool rendered the Carthaginians helpless at the initials of the wars. This weapon was corvus. It was a wooden bridge with a huge iron beak on one side. The Roman ships were also equipped with strong battering rams made of bronze. They were stronger than the Carthaginian ships. The Romans would hit the strong ramp of their ships on the Carthaginian ships passing by them. That would tear apart the planks of Carthaginian ships and make them imbalanced. Meanwhile, the corvus in a Roman ship would pierce into the Carthaginian ship to catch it like the bill of a crow. It would serve as a wooden bridge between the two pinned ships. Through this bridge, the Romans would cross to the enemy side and kill the rival soldiers with their gladius. This way, they would also get the benefit of the ground battle of man-to-man fight in the naval war. The Romans caused the Carthaginians great loss through this genius technique at the start of the wars. However, the Carthaginians also learned to contrive better techniques to tackle the Romans. However, overall, they had many defeats in those 118 years long Punic Wars. The most important of them was the first, called the Battle of the Aegates Islands. It was fought in 241 BC. It was such a fierce battle that even to date the remains of the Roman and Carthaginian ships are recovered from sea, particularly the battering rams of bronze, at a large scale. In this hour-long war, the Romans and the Carthaginians sank hundreds of ships of each other. The naval fleets on both sides were badly disarrayed. However, the Romans won by way of cutting off a supply line of the Carthaginians. Due to this, the Carthaginians could not get reinforcement from their mainland. Apart from this, the Romans were much better than the Carthaginians in one-on-one battle. Thus the fights made with corvus caused heavier losses to the Carthaginians. The Carthaginians were decisively defeated in the Battle of the Aegates Islands. Sicily, the most important island in the Mediterranean Sea, was captured by the Romans. After the capture of Sicily by the Romans, the important link between Africa, Asia, and Europe in the Mediterranean Sea had a changed balance. Now the Romans were also recognized as a major naval power in the sea, although the Carthaginians still ruled many islands in North Africa and Spain. Now the Romans and the Carthaginians were arch-rivals. From this womb of this hatred, a legendary Carthaginian general was born, a general who almost eliminated the Romans in the Second Punic War. This was Carthaginian General Hannibal Barca. In 218 BCE, General Hannibal unbelievably crossed over a distance of 2,400 kilometers. In the north of Italy, he passed through the snow-clad mountains with an army of elephants and attacked Rome. Hannibal entered to the north and up to the south in Rome city. No Roman could face his army. As the Romans had learned about the naval war, the Carthaginian general also attained expertise in the ground battle. The unconquerable Roman army was completely helpless before the Carthaginian general in the whole of Italy. In 211 BCE, Hannibal reached the door of Rome with a victorious army. The Romans locked themselves in the city, which was a unique situation for the Carthaginian general, a situation he was not systematically ready to face. The defense of the Roman city was quite formidable behind the strong walls. The Romans had been fortifying this defense since they had erected the Servian walls after the defeat by the Gauls. However, by the time Hannibal came, the walls were in much better shape and much stronger than in the past. Hannibal would repeatedly come near the strong walls, take ground, and never dare attack. Sitting at a distance with his army, he was waiting for the moment the Romans would be compelled to surrender, or they would enter talks with him, or come out in the open for an all-out war. However, neither the Romans came out nor Hannibal attempted to hit the strong walls. Historians still debate why a successful general like Hannibal did not eliminate Rome despite reaching so close to it. Why did not he attack Rome? The experts of Roman history say that to break the fortress-like defense of Rome, Hannibal had estimated a large army to break the defense of Rome and a huge life loss therein. Secondly, he did not have the war machinery to break the formidable defense of Rome. That meant he did not have the catapults of that level. The third important reason was the reinforcement his brother Hasdrubal Barca was bringing from Spain. Hannibal was waiting for him and wanted to save the maximum of his power before he could arrive, so that a comprehensive attack is made in one go. There was another reason besides these three. That was a guerrilla attack the Romans had unleashed on the Hannibal forces with the help of their outside allies. Hannibal also attempted to break the Roman allies to prevent these attacks, but he did not succeed. The Roman allies in the mainland remained loyal and continued to deceive Hannibal. The secret behind all that was the fact the Romans knew that Hannibal would not attack before his brother could arrive. The Romans had also come to about the route of Hasdrubal through a spy, which the Romans had caught. Will it be sufficient? The queen consented to it and got an ox slaughtered. She peeled off its skin and cut it into thin strips. The total length of these strips was enough to encircle a hill on the coast. The chieftain was highly impressed with the intelligence of the queen and gave her and her companions this land. Here the queen laid the foundation of the Carthage city, which later became a great naval and trade power of the ancient world. They were much more civilized than the Roman Republic and had a better system than the Romans. In the north of Tunisia near Kairouan, the remains of the city still tell its grandeur. The Carthaginian Empire had become a super naval in the 5th century BC, when Rome had yet to stand on its feet. The empire in its prime spanned North Africa to South Europe up to Spain of today. This empire also ruled innumerable islands in the Mediterranean Sea. Among these islands also included the important island of Sicily right in front of the Roman Empire in the south. So it became imperative for the Romans to deal with the Carthaginians if they were to become naval and trade power in the region. Therefore, they did the same. The Romans called the Carthaginians Penis in their language, as they were Phoenician origin in Lebanese and Palestinian lands. They used the word pony for more than one Carthaginian. That is why historians have named the Romans' battles with the Carthaginians as Punic Wars. These wars continued for 118 years. The Romans had a dire need for a strong naval fleet to fight the Carthaginians. However, when these battles were initiated around 260 BC, the Romans did not have any naval ships. The Romans had great expertise in the ground battle, so they devised a technique to fight the Carthaginians in the sea. They stole some ships of the Carthaginians, which contained the material to build the ships and the skillmen. These wooden panels were also marked to join the parts. With the labor for months and engineering skills, the Romans prepared many naval ships and fleets. The ships were constructed to enable the Romans to use their ground expertise in the sea as well. For that, they invented a new war tool. This tool rendered the Carthaginians helpless at the initials of the wars. This weapon was corvus. It was a wooden bridge with a huge iron beak on one side. The Roman ships were also equipped with strong battering rams made of bronze. They were stronger than the Carthaginian ships. The Romans would hit the strong ramp of their ships on the Carthaginian ships passing by them. That would tear apart the planks of Carthaginian ships and make them imbalanced. Meanwhile, the corvus of a Roman ship would pierce into the Carthaginian ship to catch it like the bill of a crow. It would serve as a wooden bridge between the two pinned ships. Through this bridge, the Romans would cross to the enemy's side and kill the rival soldiers with their gladius. This way, they would also get the benefit of the ground battle of man-to-man fight in the naval war. The Romans caused the Carthaginians great loss through this genius technique at the start of the wars. However, the Carthaginians also learned to contrive better techniques to tackle the Romans. However, overall they had many defeats in those 118 years long Punic Wars. The most important of them was the first, called the Battle of the Aegates Islands. It was fought in 241 BC. It was such a fierce battle that even to date the remains of the Roman and Carthaginian ships are recovered from sea, particularly the battering rams of bronze at a large scale. In this hour-long war, the Romans and the Carthaginians sank hundreds of ships of each other. The naval fleets on both sides were badly disarrayed. However, the Romans won by way of cutting off the supply line of the Carthaginians. Due to this, the Carthaginians could not get reinforcement from their mainland. Apart from this, the Romans were much better than the Carthaginians in one-on-one battle. Thus the fights made with Corvus caused heavier losses to the Carthaginians. The Carthaginians were decisively defeated in the Battle of the Aegates Islands. Sicily, the most important island in the Mediterranean Sea, was captured by the Romans. After the capture of Sicily by the Romans, the important link between Africa, Asia, and Europe in the Mediterranean Sea had a changed balance. Now the Romans were also recognized as a major naval power in the sea, although the Carthaginians still ruled many islands in North Africa and Spain. Now the Romans and the Carthaginians were arch-rivals. From this womb of this hatred, a legendary Carthaginian general was born, a general who almost eliminated the Romans in the Second Punic War. This was Carthaginian General Hannibal Barca. In 218 BCE, General Hannibal unbelievably crossed over a distance of 2,400 kilometers. In the north of Italy, he passed through the snow-clad mountains with an army of elephants and attacked Rome. Hannibal entered through the north and up to the south in Rome city. No Roman could face his army. As the Romans had learned about the naval war, the Carthaginian general also attained expertise in the ground battle. The unconquerable Roman army was completely helpless before the Carthaginian general in the whole of Italy. In 211 BCE, Hannibal reached the door of Rome with a victorious army. The Romans locked themselves in the city, which was a unique situation for the Carthaginian general, a situation he was not systematically ready to face. The defense of the Roman city was quite formidable behind the strong walls. The Romans had been fortifying its defense since they had erected the Servian walls after the defeat by the Gauls. However, by the time Hannibal came, the walls were in much better shape and much stronger than in the past. Hannibal would repeatedly come near the strong walls, take ground, and never dare attack. Sitting at a distance with his army, he was waiting for the moment the Romans would be compelled to surrender, or they would enter talks with him, or come out in the open for an all-out war. However, neither the Romans came out nor Hannibal attempted to hit the strong walls. Historians still debate why a successful general like Hannibal did not eliminate Rome despite reaching so close to it. Why did not he attack Rome? The experts of Roman history say that to break the fortress-like defense of Rome, Hannibal had estimated a large army to break the defense of Rome and a huge life lost therein. Secondly, he did not have the war machinery to break the formidable defense of Rome. That meant he did not have the catapults of that level. The third important reason was the reinforcement his brother Hasdrubal Barca was bringing from Spain. Hannibal was waiting for him and wanted to save the maximum of his power before he could arrive, so that a comprehensive attack is made in one go. There was another reason besides these three. That was the guerrilla attack the Romans had unleashed on the Hannibal forces with the help of their outside allies. Hannibal also attempted to break the Roman allies to prevent these attacks, but he did not succeed. The Roman allies in the mainland remained loyal and continued to deceive Hannibal. The secret behind all that was the fact the Romans knew that Hannibal would not attack before his brother could arrive. The Romans had also come to about the route of Hasdrubal through a spy, which the Romans had caught.
Will it be sufficient? The queen consented to it and got an ox slaughtered. She peeled off its skin and cut it into thin strips. The total length of these strips was enough to encircle a hill on the coast. The chieftain was highly impressed with the intelligence of the queen and gave her and her companions this land. Here the queen laid the foundation of the Carthage city, which later became a great naval and trade power of the ancient world. They were much more civilized than the Roman Republic and had a better system than the Romans. In the north of Tunisia near Kairouan, the remains of this city still tell its grandeur. The Carthaginian Empire had become a supernaval in the 5th century BCE when Rome had yet to stand on its feet. The empire in its prime spanned North Africa to South Europe up to Spain of today. This empire also ruled innumerable islands in the Mediterranean Sea. Among these islands also included the important island of Sicily right in front of the Roman Empire in the south. So it became imperative for the Romans to deal with the Carthaginians if they were to become naval and trade power in the region. Therefore, they did the same. The Romans called the Carthaginians Poenis in their language, as they were of Phoenician origin in Lebanese and Palestinian lands. They used the word Poeni for more than one Carthaginian. That is why historians have named the Romans' battles with the Carthaginians as Punic Wars. These wars continued for 118 years. The Romans had a dire need for a strong naval fleet to fight the Carthaginians. However, when these battles were initiated around 260 BCE, the Romans did not have any naval ships. The Romans had great expertise in the ground battle. So they devised a technique to fight the Carthaginians in the sea. They stole some ships of the Carthaginians which contained the material to build the ships and the skill men. These wooden panels were also marked to join the parts. With the labor for months and engineering skills, the Romans prepared many naval ships and fleets. The ships were constructed to enable the Romans to use their ground expertise in the sea as well. For that, they invented a new war tool. This tool rendered the Carthaginians helpless at the initials of the wars. This weapon was corvus. It was a wooden bridge with a huge iron beak on one side. The Roman ships were also equipped with strong battering ramps made of bronze. They were stronger than the Carthaginian ships. The Romans would hit the strong ramp of their ships on the Carthaginian ships passing by them. That would tear apart the planks of Carthaginian ships and make them imbalanced. Meanwhile, the corvus in the Roman ship would pierce into the Carthaginian ship to catch it like the bill of a crow. It would serve as a wooden bridge between the two pinned ships. Through this bridge, the Romans would cross to the enemy side and kill the rival soldiers with their gladius. This way, they would also get the benefit of the ground battle of man-to-man fight in the naval war. The Romans caused the Carthaginians great loss through this genius technique at the start of the wars. However, the Carthaginians also learned to contrive better techniques to tackle the Romans. However, overall they had many defeats in those 118 years long Punic Wars. The most important of them was the first, called the Battle of the Aegates Islands. It was fought in 241 BCE. It was such a fierce battle that even to date the remains of the Roman and Carthaginian ships are recovered from sea. Particularly the battering ramps of bronze at a large scale. In this hour-long war, the Romans and the Carthaginians sank hundreds of ships of each other. The naval fleets on both sides were badly disarrayed. However, the Romans won, by way of cutting off the supply line of the Carthaginians. Due to this, the Carthaginians could not get reinforcement from their mainland. Apart from this, the Romans were much better than the Carthaginians in one-on-one battle. Thus the fights made with corvus caused heavier losses to the Carthaginians. The Carthaginians were decisively defeated in the Battle of the Aegates Islands. Sicily, the most important island in the Mediterranean Sea, was captured by the Romans. After the capture of Sicily by the Romans, the important link between Africa, Asia, and Europe, in the Mediterranean Sea had a changed balance. Now the Romans were also recognized as a major naval power in the sea. Although the Carthaginians still ruled many islands in North Africa and Spain. Now the Romans and the Carthaginians were arch-rivals. From this womb of this hatred, a legendary Carthaginian general was born. A general who almost eliminated the Romans in the Second Punic War. This was Carthaginian General Hannibal Barca. In 218 BCE, General Hannibal unbelievably crossed over a distance of 2,400 kilometers. In the north of Italy, he passed through the snow-clad mountains with an army of elephants and attacked Rome. Hannibal entered through the north and up to the south in Rome city. No Roman could face his army. As the Romans had learnt about the naval war, the Carthaginian general also attained expertise in the ground battle. The unconquerable Roman army was completely helpless before the Carthaginian general in the whole of Italy. In 211 BCE, Hannibal reached the door of Rome with a victorious army. The Romans locked themselves in the city, which was a unique situation for the Carthaginian general. A situation he was not systematically ready to face. The defense of the Roman city was quite formidable behind the strong walls. The Romans had been fortifying this defense since they had erected the Servian walls after the defeat by the Gauls. However, by the time Hannibal came, the walls were in much better shape and much stronger than in the past. Hannibal would repeatedly come near the strong walls, take ground, and never dare attack. Sitting at a distance with his army, he was waiting for the moment the Romans would be compelled to surrender. Or they would enter talks with him or come out in the open for an all-out war. However, neither the Romans came out nor Hannibal attempted to hit the strong walls. Historians still debate why a successful general like Hannibal did not eliminate Rome despite reaching so close to it. Why did not he attack Rome? The experts of Roman history say that to break the fortress-like defense of Rome, Hannibal had estimated a large army to break the defense of Rome and a huge life loss therein. Secondly, he did not have the war machinery to break the formidable defense of Rome. That meant he did not have the catapults of that level. The third important reason was the reinforcement his brother Hasdrubal Barca was bringing from Spain. Hannibal was waiting for him and wanted to save the maximum of his power before he could arrive, so that a comprehensive attack is made in one go. There was another reason besides these three. That was the guerrilla attack the Romans had unleashed on the Hannibal forces with the help of their outside allies. Hannibal also attempted to break the Roman allies to prevent these attacks, but he did not succeed. The Roman allies in the mainland remained loyal and continued to deceive Hannibal. The secret behind all that was the fact the Romans knew that Hannibal would not attack before his brother could arrive. The Romans had also come to about the route of Hasdrubal through his spy which the Romans had caught. The Romans had defeated the Carthaginian general in deception warfare. They had secretly built a large army with the aid of their allies. The Roman army was present at the Meteoric River, 130 kilometers off the Hannibal forces, laying a noose for his brother. In 2007 BCE, Hannibal's brother alighted from the Alpine mountain with his army. The Romans crushed him with the help of his allies. Then they sent a gift to the camp of Hannibal pitched at a distance from Rome. In June 2007 BCE, a bag was dropped at the Carthaginian camp. The bag was brought and opened before Hannibal and it had the head of his brother. It is known that after that Hannibal uttered the words that no one can now stop the Romans from ruling the world. The best general of the Carthaginians is no more. Till the death of Hasdrubal Barca, Hannibal had passed 11 years to his military campaign in Rome. Now he was completely disappointed with the victory in Rome. Moreover, the Romans also hit the Carthaginians badly to demoralize them further. They did that under the command of General Scipio was sent to attack the Carthage Empire of Hannibal in North Africa. Hannibal learned about the arrival of the Roman army to conquer the Carthage Empire. He made his way back with the desire to conquer Rome in his heart. Hannibal returned unsuccessful from Rome in 203 BCE after a 15-year-long military campaign. With it, the Romans also thought of a complete elimination of the Carthage Empire for self-defense. Otherwise, the Carthaginians would eliminate them at any time. In 2002 BCE, a fierce fight took place between the armies of Carthaginian general Hannibal and the Roman general Scipio. This is called the Battle of Zama, which took place in North Africa. The Carthaginian general Hannibal suffered a decisive defeat and the Carthage Empire fell to the mercy of the Romans. Most of the Hannibal's army was perished. He somehow survived and roamed about aimlessly in different areas. Eventually, he poisoned himself to death when he was about to be arrested in the present-day region of Turkey. The Carthage Empire was left with a small piece of land after losing its power, pride, navy, and a large part. However, Rome thought even that much of the Carthage Empire as a potential threat to it. In 146 BCE, the Romans once again decided to attack the Carthaginian region. They took the stand that the Carthaginians were secretly preparing a strong navy to attack us at any time. It was because the remaining Carthaginian coastal cities were quite rich with a lot of timber and ship-making factories working therein. A Roman senator was a witness to all that and convinced the Senate that the Carthaginians were still an existential threat to them, so they must be eliminated. The Romans attacked the Carthage Empire in 146 BCE and put it to an end. The Carthage city remained on fire for 17 days. No person in the coastal cities was left alive. Those who survived the killing were locked in their homes and they were set on fire. In a city of 500,000 population, only 50,000 could survive. From among them, the males were killed and women and children were made slaves and sold out in the market. In the Tunisian city today, the signs of that horrible war can be sighted here and there. The effects of the weeks-long fire remained indelible on the city walls. This fight was one of the most ruthless in the world history. A fight in which a city was destroyed completely for fear, it would gain the power to challenge the Romans. It was the self-defense logic. The The 118-year-long Punic Wars made the Roman naval and ground military machine supreme. Now no power in the world could face Rome. Rome had established rule over the most important Mediterranean Sea in the world. That is why this sea in the Persian, Arabic and Urdu languages is called Bahria Rome. Rome was getting power and expansion but was losing its common values speedily at the same time. The letters of SPQR for the Senate and the free people were carved on the flags, walls and monuments, but they had lost their meanings. The rights of the 12 tablets, once the pride of the Romans, were only in name now. Because amassing wealth and making and trading slaves were the foremost objectives of the rich elites. Getting toil of the slaves in the fields was much cheaper than hiring the common Romans. This caused joblessness to the ordinary Romans in rural areas and they moved to the city for jobs. The city was not able to accommodate so many people. So these poor Romans were forced to live in single rooms in multi-story buildings which were no better than pigeonholes. The patricians had built these rooms for them. These rooms were without ventilation, proper sanitation, and kitchen facility. Diseases and epidemics would commonly erupt in these places due to more people and the absence of cleanliness. Malaria, tuberculosis, plague, leprosy, and respiratory diseases became very common in these places. The rich Romans, the patriarchs, began to live separately. Unlike the initial period of the Roman kingdom and the Roman Republic, now the patriarchs would live separately from the poor. The poor Romans were linked to the rich patriarchs only for recruitment in the army or to work for them on projects. Otherwise, both the classes were cut off from each other badly. The common values they would take pride in was no more except history and the powerful military. Their powerful military was due to the innate concept in the Romans to solve the problems through force and violence. Therefore, the Roman elite once again drifted into clashes. It was such a clash in which the use of force put the Roman Republic to an end. The abominable one-man rule or kingdom, the Romans hated the most, came into existence again. It so happened that in 50 BCE Roman general Julius Caesar gained unbelievable victories. He defeated the Roman enemies' Gauls and the Germanics in their respective strong forts. During his 8-year military campaign, he conquered modern-day France, Germany, parts of Belgium, and Switzerland. He also made successful attacks on England and temporarily captured some of its parts. During that period he exhibited his military excellence and killed more than 1 million people. In 50 BCE, when he returned to Rome with success, he also brought a large amount of wealth with him. Besides that, he also had 40,000 experienced battle-hardened soldiers with him. The Senate feared that Julius Caesar would enter the city with his army. No one would dare face and he will win the Senate and people with his wealth. Therefore the most powerful senator Pompey tried to stop Julius Caesar with the help of his companions. Julius Caesar was conveyed to enter the city alone, leaving his army behind the Rubicon River which bordered Rome. If he crossed the river with his army, he would be deemed a rebel and be treated as such. However, Julius Caesar would have lost his life had he entered the city alone. Because the powerful senators had already framed different cases against him. They were already poised to take him into custody on corruption and sedition charges which however had some substance. Because over the last many years, Julius Caesar had performed for his own interests in the name of Roman interests. He was ambitious for immense power and money. He had collected huge wealth in the conquered regions and had erected skyscrapers in Rome with his statues installed in. He was buying properties in Rome for setting up grand buildings. The Senate feared the Roman Republic would revert to the monarchy. Caesar wanted to become the King Rex, a word the Romans hated the most. Senator Pompey was strong in the Senate and pretty popular in Rome. He, along with another general, Marcus Crassus, had crushed the third rebellion of the slaves. The same well-known rebellion you must have seen in the Spartacus series. Pompey, who had already outclassed Marcus Crassus, did not want to let Caesar enter the city anyway, as it has to also challenge his own power. But in Rome, the use of violence was the rule of thumb. So on January 10, 49 BCE, Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon River with his entire army. Pompey and his supporters fled the city and Julius Caesar captured the city and the Senate. He constituted a new Senate, called back some old people and declared himself a dictator. According to him, it was a critical juncture and he had to crush the rebellion of Pompey, which he did. He got Pompey killed in 48 BCE when he was hidden in Egypt. Julius Caesar won this terrible civil war in Rome and set on installing and promoting his statues in the city like he was a god. He retained himself as a dictator even after the civil war. Rather, in 44 BCE, he appointed himself as a lifetime dictator. For the first time in Roman history, he imprinted his image on the coins, which earlier was not a tradition. He presented himself as a deity, and a section of people also regarded him as such. The senator's interests were also jeopardized by the steps of Caesar, so a large part of it also became hostile to him. So as many as 60 secretly planned to kill Julius Caesar. This group of senators named themselves liberators as they believed they stood for the true independence of Rome. On March 15, 44 BCE, when Julius Caesar was walking to his golden chair in the Senate, the liberators surrounded him. Then 24 liberators stabbed him with daggers one by one. Caesar saw many of his close associates also piercing the daggers through his heart. The famous Brutus, who was like the son of Caesar, was also among them. After killing, whenever Brutus was asked if he disliked his guardian Caesar that much, he would reply, "Not that I loved Caesar less, but that I loved Rome more. That it was not the case that I loved Caesar less, but I loved Rome first and last." After the assassination of Julius Caesar, the situation became worse instead of getting better. In fact, a large number of the Romans loved Julius Caesar. They demanded punishment for the killers of Julius Caesar. The 18-year-old nephew of Caesar, Octavian, was in the forefront. He was declared successor by Caesar during his lifetime. A big chunk in the army became his loyalist, and Octavian waged a war against the assassins of Caesar. The liberator fled to eastern Rome, where they gathered an army to fight Octavian. Rome once again plunged into a civil war for 13 years. The chronic tradition of solving the problems through violence was costing Rome even at home. The chaos spread over the years was eventually over with the clear victory of Octavian. Brutus, who also killed Julius Caesar, committed suicide. Octavian defeated the killers of Caesar and also prevailed upon the rivals to his rule. With it, Octavian also took complete control over Rome in 27 BCE. Yes, over the Roman Empire, which had not turned into an empire after 482 years of republican rule. After oppression by the last emperor Tarquinius, the Romans had again entered the one-man rule after 500 years. However, no one still dared to use the title of king, rex, or emperor for himself. Therefore, Octavian got for himself the title of Augustus from the Senate. Later he also adopted the title of princeps, which means the first Roman. It was just the jugglery of the words, as August was actually an emperor. He had kept the Senate alive as a rubber stamp. This series persisted for the next 6 centuries till the time of Romulus. The other Roman rulers titled themselves Augustus, Caesar, etc., but never adopted the emperor and rex title. The Roman Empire also had the fundamental character of the Roman kingdom and Roman republican that was set by the founder of Romulus, winning through violence and learning from mistakes. The Roman Empire, surpassing the kingdom and the republic, stayed for 1,500 years. Coincidentally, the first ruler of Rome was Romulus. When the Western Roman Empire came to an end, its ruler's name was also Romulus. Romulus Augustus. How did the Roman Empire come to an end, and why its eastern part become Christian? What mistakes led the Roman Empire to end? We will talk about it in the next and final vlog of this series. You must watch it. He showered flowers on his guests so heavily that some died of suffocation under the flowers. Foods of different tastes and the nightingale's tongues in up to 7,000 dishes were served in a single meal. The same story follows the emperor you saw in the movie The Gladiators. The powerful Roman army made Rome great, and the same army also brought about its downfall. Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon River, filling bags with the heads of the barbarians, but the force of the same barbarians attacked Rome. Rome did not come into being in a day. It took centuries of hundreds of experts and millions of workers who gave their blood to build it. At a time in the world, every 5th person was a Roman. After all, why Rome was great and why did it fall down? Is America also following the same path? How are you, friends? I, Faisal Warich. How did Rome originate from a village into a town, from a town to a city, a kingdom, and then a republic, and how did it turn into an empire? You are learning through our videos this very interesting historical story. The Roman Empire was set in 27 BCE with Octavian Augustus. He was the nephew of Julius Caesar who ruled for 40 years. He designed the rule in a way that only the powerful could ascend to the rule. The emperor had absolute control over the Senate, politics, the army, and the people. Now the army legions in Rome were loyal to the emperor instead of different generals. Huge amphitheaters were set up in Rome for the fighting of the gladiators so that people remained busy. In these theaters slaves, prisoners, gallants, and animals were put to fighting. This circle-shaped building croissant in Rome was also an amphitheater. It was built by Emperor Titus in the 80 BCE. The contests in the amphitheaters were the most important the Roman patriarchs held for popularity and public entertainment. The competitions would last for weeks and months. With tax money the Roman emperor would levy on the Senate and the masses. The poor plebeians had a pastime from these games and spectacles. A newly made Roman emperor would construct grand temples and projects to pose as a developer of Rome. It would instrument jobs for the plebeians and impression that the state was not sitting free. Emperor Augustus ruled Rome for 4 decades on the same pattern. In 2 centuries, Rome had 14 emperors who followed the pattern of Octavian to rule. They would constantly set the tile of Caesar and Augustus for themselves. We call the English and the Latin languages Caesar Kaiser Rome in the Urdu language. By 127 BCE, the Roman Empire had spread over 2 million square miles. It was such a vast state difficult to be run by a single ruler, let alone give it a uniform culture. From Scotland in the north to the present-day Syria and Egypt in the south to Morocco in the west. It was entirely Rome. The whole trade of the Mediterranean Sea was under the control of Rome, which would place embargoes on the one it was annoyed with. They would cause immense damage to the economy of that country or the city. This monopoly on the trade route made the emperor and the Roman elite filthy rich. They became so affluent that they developed very weird habits. It was famous about Emperor Heliogabalus that he loved to eat the tongues of the nightingales, so the birds were hunted extensively in Rome. He was known to get dishes for his meals in a specific color and designs as a brand. Out of extreme taste for flowers and fragrance, he built a roof of the banquet hall to drop flowers and fragrance all the time. Once he showered flowers so heavily on his guests that some were lost to suffocation under them. The food dishes were also matched by the patriarchs at every meal. Earlier Roman historians say that dishes in hundreds and sometimes in thousands were prepared for a single meal. Emperor Vitellius sought multiple meals a day, with each having 2,000 dishes of fish and 7,000 of the birds. At times guests were present at the meals while the emperor would dine alone at other times. To cater to the taste of the nobles, a special species of ostriches was searched for. From the shores of Greece, small fish were brought and special chefs would prepare soup with the intestines. A full-fledged army was there to net parrots in Europe. Separate dishes were prepared with the meat of every part of the bird. Patriarchs had made huge banquet halls for these lavish meals where music, dance, and mini gladiator fights were also held. Countless slaves were killed for the pleasure of the nobles. To eat oysters in winter, warm water ponds were made with their bed light warm. Hectic efforts were made in Rome in search of the oldest wine, and festivities of gathering corresponded with its oldness. A 100-year-old wine was purchased for the demanded price, and sometimes a gallon of it would be worth 100 slaves. So the more Rome was becoming rich with the riches of the patricians, the poor plebeians were equally getting into isolation. The 12 Tables agreement of the Republican era with them was broken. Their representative tribune was called to meetings, but he had become a part of the nobles or good for nothing. There was no arrangement to dispose of the garbage in the city, and no toilets were either. Rome was quite rich, yet the common man used streets as toilets. The population of the empire went up alarmingly, but the real Romans were scant in number. The new entrants in Rome were denied citizenship from the beginning of the Roman Empire. It made Rome an apartheid state. In it, a section of people enjoyed full rights, yet many were without any. The have-nots were treated as subject citizens. This benefited the rivals of Rome, as disgruntled people would join them and they would betray Rome. An attempt was made in 212 CE to overcome this problem. when Emperor Caracalla gave complete citizenship to 30 million people living in Rome. Historians differing on this count say that the citizenship of so many people weakened the state of Rome. Because Rome now had lost its identity. They were new Romans spread from Syria to Scotland and divested of even the Latin language, let alone the classical Roman culture. The Roman religious ideology also collapsed after it was built by merging different deities and faiths into one. The prestigious SPQR slogans also ended after 600 years, as the Roman Senate had no significance nor did civil liberty exist. Under SPQR, no absolute ruler could stay on the Romans. Now under the titles Augustus and Caesar, powerful emperors ruled the Romans. The Roman Empire lasted for another 100 years in this style. The Emperor Commodus was the last Roman ruler in 180 CE whose era had not civil war. It was because Commodus ascended to power after his father Marcus Aurelius, who was one of the 5 great Roman emperors. Historians know Marcus Aurelius as a philosopher king. Rome was passing through good conditions when his son came to power after 19 years of peaceful rule by Marcus Aurelius. But Commodus brought a very bad name to his ancestors by entrusting the power to rule to his nobles and giving himself to fantasies. He got the fantasy of being the second birth of the legendary hero Hercules. Hercules, the son of the god Jupiter, was a powerful character in Roman mythology. Hercules was an example of bravery, courage, and sacrifice for the Romans. The Emperor Commodus also prepared the same kind of statues for himself that Hercules had done. Commodus particularly liked the Hercules pose with a club. So he prepared countless such statues of him and installed them everywhere in Rome. He also changed many months of the calendar after his name or title. He replaced August with Commodus and October with his favorite character Hercules. But changing the names of the months and installing statues do not make one a Hercules. For it, the needful is admitting oneself in the field of contests. Commodus for it resorted to a weird way. Commodus started the biggest games in Roman history and gladiator fights stood at the top of them. A flurry rolled through Rome when Commodus himself came down to the arena as a gladiator to fight the powerful gladiators. After that, he routed the strong gladiators one by one. He actually was desperate to win the hearts of the people. He was ready to go to any length for this purpose. So, the competitions went on and he won the contest one after the other. In the Roman amphitheater, he actually was proving himself a Hercules. However, the Romans soon came to know that his rivals were given blunt swords which did not have cutting edge. Or the rivals before the contest are administered any poison or medicine which intoxicated them. In other words, these all competitions were staged and fake, carrying the only objective of projecting an inefficient and duffer emperor to excel Marcus Aurelius, Augustus, and Caesar in the Herculean image. Late Roman historians write that Commodus won 12,000 fake fights. In these contests, he not only defeated the men but also killed thousands of animals to earn public applause. He killed thousands of tigers, elephants, rhinos, and giraffes by hitting them with spears from a distance. During year-long contests, he thrashed to death 100 bears in a day. So much bloodshed in the name of entertainment of the Romans became a nuisance instead of enjoyment. People began to hate his practice of shedding blood. On the other hand, the huge spendings on sports also burdened the public exchequer. The Romans began to term Commodus a mad emperor. Due to the oppression of Commodus, his relations and courtiers also turned against him. Therefore, efforts began to get rid of him. He was also receiving intelligence information and reports on them. So he began to live in fear of being killed by anyone at any time. So he killed hundreds of his close relations and courtiers to overcome this fear. Even he killed his sister on suspicion. Fed up with his insanity, his beloved Marisha and some others planned to kill him. Marcia administered him poison in wine. The poison was not pure or its quantity was not adequate, that only made Commodus unconscious and did not kill him. So the conspirators urgently called a wrestler Narcissus, who also bore a grudge against the emperor, strangulated the self-styled Hercules emperor. You must have watched the popular movie Gladiator. The emperor who fights Gladiator Maximus in this movie is the same Commodus. Although the chunk of this movie is not historically correct, the background of the story and nature are historically perfect. That is, then Roman society was the same as shown in the movie. Although the narration is fabricated. Emperor Commodus was killed in 192 CE at the age of 31. He was the last stable ruler of Rome. His demise pushed Rome to permanent chaos and repeated civil wars. From Octavian Augustus to Commodus, in 166 years, Rome had only 14 emperors. But in the next century, Rome had 70 rulers. In the first year of this century, 5 emperors came and went like changing weather. The Roman army, which was held in great pride, became a source of the downfall of Rome. The army had become so powerful that it began to decide the fate of the rulers. The Praetorian guards deputed to the safety of the emperor would now auction the crown at the door of the Senate. The guards would crown the senator or commander who offered a heavy amount of money in the bidding. Civil wars would trigger after the death of an emperor as the army had expanded much, shifting its loyalty to commanders from the emperors. Then the raising of a huge army was costing high, so constant wars became inevitable to get money for it. Rome had already expanded to 2 million square miles and did not permit any further expansion. And if it did not expand, money was hard to get to sustain the huge army. So the large army became a doom for Rome instead of a gain. Armies led by different commanders and in different areas would many times clash with each other in civil wars. The dependence on slaves by the elitists was the other thing which caused huge damage to Rome. The Roman landlords were multiplying their riches by the free of charge labor of the slaves. With the help of the slaves, the rich would prepare millions of gallons wine every year and supply it across the world. They would buy millions of new slaves with the wealth earned by this means. However, it caused the damage that the common Roman, the plebeians, stopped getting jobs since slaves would cost them much low. The plebeians now had only 2 choices. That were either they get recruited in the army for a permanent income or move to the cities to labor on development projects of constructing roads and bridges. Both situations were harmful for Rome. Because the army was already overburdened with soldiers and further recruitment was to add to it. And joblessness was jack up if they were not inducted in the army. Moreover, the plebeians in cities were also not getting jobs. The emperors were not initiating the mega-development projects of the past centuries. So the Romans in the cities had neither jobs nor the option to go back to their villages. Consequently, a market of brothel houses and self-sort cropped up. The males became mercenaries to fight for anyone in anywhere in the world for money. The demand for the damsels increased in taverns and bars. The hired soldiers would go to remote areas and come back with assorted diseases and viruses. The hygiene conditions in Rome had already dwindled, so Roman society fell victim to multiple diseases. For example, the Cyprian plague so much spread in Rome in the mid-3rd century that up to 5,000 bodies a day were taken out. Rome had lost its power, grandeur, and pride. Now it had remains of some buildings in a shamble, indicating the magnificence of the edifice. One after the other, emperors were killed at the hands of their guards and security personnel. From 235 to 248 CE, in 46 years, 12 Roman emperors were replaced. Many of them were killed. Some on the battlefield and others in accidents. None died naturally. You know, a system which has back-to-back killing of the rulers is a failed system, and the Roman system got the stamp of this failure. The old rivals of Rome raised their heads when they saw it falling down. The barbarians whose heads were stuffed in bags by Julius Caesar to cross the Rubicon River, from the areas new forces invaded Rome. Germanic tribes in particular shook Rome. The weak Roman forces were almost helpless before them. Now the Roman forces, instead of fighting, took to diplomacy against them. The Roman commanders in case of war with a Berber tribe would reach an agreement with its rival tribe and get it settled in Rome and fight with its help. The Berber tribes and their chiefs knew well about the weakness of Rome. Therefore, they slowly began to develop their influence on the Roman throne. Until the 5th century, the Roman emperors remained greatly under the influence of these tribes. Eventually, in 476 CE, the barbarian tribal chief Odoacer deposed the last Roman emperor Romulus, and himself ascended to the throne in his stead. The chapter of PQSR, Senatus Populusque Romanus, was not closed. The western part of the Roman Empire, which had Rome as the center, had a downfall. The story starts with Romulus, who was fed on the milk of a she-wolf, and ends with Romulus Augustus after 11 centuries. The Western Empire of Rome ended in the 5th century, yet its eastern part was still there. This part was secure from the barbarian attacks and was strong. With time, the Eastern Roman Empire became distinctive from the western part. But the legacy of ancient Rome continued with it. The Eastern Roman Empire was established by Emperor Constantine in 31 CE when it was a united Rome. He shifted the capital of the Roman Empire to Constantinople, where Turkey is today. Moreover, he adopted Christianity as a religion to unite the Romans and give them a new identity. That is, he converted Rome to Christianity. Constantine the Great was the emperor who worked to combine the Bible and the Torah to the present form. Under his patronage, Christianity also took the form of an organized faith. Emperor Constantine needed it to unite Rome under one faith, as old values and multiple deities could not work in this vast empire. Roman Empire had lost its common values, so Emperor Constantine went by the idea of a state with one emperor, one religion, and one military commander would make the state united and strong. The emperor also helped the monotheistic religion of Christianity to become non-violent and peaceful in the state, since it was to make it for him easy to deal with the civil wars. So, he established churches across Eastern Rome to preach the teachings of peace, humanity, and Jesus Christ's sacrifices to the people. The Roman Empire in history had badly treated Jesus Christ and his disciples. However, Constantine and his successors took special care while compiling history that no adverse remarks and lines about the Roman emperors get into history. Although it was a fact that the Romans had held the practice of burning the Christians alive on the hooks for 3 centuries. They believed the Christians were ominous and responsible for the destruction of ancient Rome. After the elimination of the Western actual Roman Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, also called the Byzantine Empire, stayed in place for the next 1,000 years. The reason behind its so long existence was the patronage of Christianity and the extremely strong walls of Constantinople. We showed in this video of ours that in 1453 CE, the cannons of Ottoman Emperor Mehmed Fatih pulled down these walls. The last emperor of the Eastern Roman Empire, Constantine XI, also ended with the fall of these walls. The Turks renamed Constantinople Istanbul, which today is the largest tourist city in Turkey. Friends, this short history of the Roman Empire enlightens us on the mistakes of the states and how they are committed. It goes about Rome that it was defeated internally as its own power became its weakness, which led to its end. It looked into deeply. The United States today has also been stuck up in the same cobweb. Today America needs a statesman of valor and intelligence who could drive the US out of this whirlpool. America earns trillions of dollars annually through its military and weapon technology, which are its largest power. With these earnings, America has set up military bases throughout the world to form a military empire. This has made it a superpower, but as a side effect, it has obliged America to continuously engage in military conflicts worldwide. The American taxpayers pay the price for this situation of America. Consequently, it generates inflation and compromises American security. In case America reigns in its war industry, then how would it run such a large military empire spread all over the world? And if it continues with it, the question is how long American power will dominate its rivals and at what cost? Will it cost America to make a handful of billionaires and trillionaires, and the majority of Americans live in inflation and unable to pay for the education of their children and the installments of the cars and rent of houses? Moreover, America has also lost its soft power. It is failing in peaceful diplomacy to sort out the problems. The American diplomacy has been shaped into a bomb diplomacy. It is confined to only pressuring the rivals with wars and putting sanctions. However, by this means America further complicates the problems instead of solving them. The conflicts of Ukraine and the Middle East are just before you. By this means, the necessities of life are getting high in prices in America and in the outer world. In short, friends, know you the same was the story of the downfall of Rome. If American bomb diplomacy persisted, the fears loom large this increasing chaos would take the world to an atomic war. to a complete destruction. Still, people hope American power players and establishment could learn from history and save the world from an atomic war. However, we have learned from history that no one has learned from history. Friends, the Roman Empire has a galore of charismatic and fantastic stories, history, and legends that cannot be recorded ever in 400 episodes, let alone the 4 episodes. After all, how can the stories of a cultured civilization spanned over 2,000 years come to an end? However, we did our best to present to you this grand chapter of history in a plain and story-styled way in brief. That is, how Romulus, who was fed on the milk of a she-wolf, founded Rome and it turned into a great empire and then had a downfall. Touch this playlist to watch this story from the beginning. Here know what was the story of Muslim Spain, and here see what will happen if the formula to please everyone in the world succeeds. This is the novel, Brave New World.